The dust cloud on the horizon should have told her something was wrong, but Hannah Ashford had been too busy scrubbing Lieutenant Morrison's uniform to notice the cavalry departing Fort Keogh until the thunder of hooves had faded into the vast Montana prairie. She stood now in the laundry yard, with soap suds dripping from her reddened hands, her heart hammering against her ribs, as she watched the last rider disappear into the shimmering heat of that July afternoon in 1878, and the terrible realization settled over her like a burial shroud that she had been left behind. The fort stood eerily silent around her, the kind of silence that felt like a held breath before a scream. Hannah dropped the uniform into the wash basin and wiped her trembling hands on her apron, her mind racing through the implications of what had just happened. The entire garrison had evacuated, riding hard toward Miles City, according to the frantic shouting she had heard earlier about Lakota raiders spotted near the Tongue River. In the chaos of the emergency departure, not a single soul had remembered the washerwoman working behind the barracks, the invisible woman who kept their clothes clean and their linens fresh, the orphan girl who had nowhere else to go. She was 22 years old, alone in an abandoned military fort on the edge of civilization, with night coming on, fast and hostile territory stretching in every direction. Hannah forced herself to breathe slowly, to think clearly, despite the panic clawing at her throat. The fort still had supplies, she reasoned, and the soldiers would surely realize their mistake and send someone back for her. She just had to survive until then. Hannah spent the next hour securing what she could, barricading herself in the quartermaster's building where the remaining food and water were stored. Her hands shook as she dragged heavy crates against the door, and she kept looking out the window at the empty parade ground, half expecting to see painted warriors streaming through the gates at any moment. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of blood orange and deep purple, and the shadows grew long across the abandoned fort. She had just lit a lamp when she heard it, the sound of a single horse approaching at a gallop. Hannah's breath caught in her throat, and she pressed herself against the wall beside the window, peering carefully through the gap in the shutters. A lone rider was racing through the fort gates, his horse lathered with sweat, and even in the fading light, she could see the determination in the way he sat his saddle. The rider pulled up in the center of the parade ground and dismounted in one fluid motion, his spurs jingling as his boots hit the ground. He was tall and lean, dressed in worn canvas pants and a dusty shirt, with a battered hat pulled low over his eyes. A cavalry scout, she realized. Not a regular soldier, but one of the civilian guides who knew this country like the lines on their own palms. "Miss Ashford," he called out, his voice carrying across the empty space. "Hannah Ashford, if you are here, you need to answer me now." Hannah hesitated only a moment before pushing the crates aside and opening the door. She stepped out into the twilight, her heart pounding so hard she thought he must surely hear it. The scout turned toward her, and she got her first clear look at his face. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps 28 or 30, with sharp features weathered by sun and wind, and eyes that were an unusual shade of gray-blue, like storm clouds over the prairie. "You are still here," he said, and there was something in his voice that might have been relief. "Thank God. I am Nathan Barrett. I ride scout for the cavalry, and I only just realized you had been left behind when we stopped to water the horses 5 miles out." Hannah found her voice, though it came out shakier than she would have liked. "The entire garrison rode out without me. They forgot I even existed." Nathan's jaw tightened, and she saw anger flash across his face, though she sensed it was not directed at her. "That was damn careless of them. Pardon my language. This is no place for anyone to be alone, least of all a woman. I turned back as soon as I noticed you were missing from the supply wagons. We need to leave now, before full dark. Can you ride?" "Not well," Hannah admitted. "I have only been on a horse a handful of times." "That will have to do. My horse can carry us both far enough to catch up with the others. But we need to move fast. Gather whatever you cannot leave behind, but be quick about it." Hannah did not argue. She ran back into the quartermaster's building and grabbed the small canvas bag that held everything she truly owned in this world. A change of clothes, her mother's silver locket, the Bible her father had given her before he died of cholera 3 years ago, and the $15 she had managed to save from her meager wages. When she emerged, Nathan was already checking the cinches on his saddle and scanning the darkening horizon with the eyes of a man who knew how to read danger in the land. "Ready?" she said, and he nodded, offering her his hand. Step into the stirrup and swing up behind me. Hold on tight to my waist and do not let go no matter what happens. If we encounter trouble, you stay on this horse and you keep your head down. Understand?" "Yes," Hannah said, taking his hand. His grip was strong and calloused, the hand of a man who had spent his life working with horses and rope and rifle. He pulled her up with surprising ease, and she settled herself behind him on the saddle, her arms wrapping around his waist. She could feel the solid strength of him through his shirt, the steady rhythm of his breathing, and somehow that small contact made her feel less alone than she had felt in years. Nathan urged his horse forward, and they rode out through the fort gates at a canter that quickly became a gallop. The world blurred around Hannah as they raced across the darkening prairie, the tall grass whispering against the horse's legs, the first stars beginning to appear in the vast Montana sky. She clung to Nathan, her face pressed against his back, breathing in the scent of leather and dust and sweat. They rode hard for nearly an hour before Nathan finally slowed the horse to a walk. Hannah could feel the animal trembling beneath them, exhausted from carrying double weight at such speed. She loosened her grip slightly on Nathan's waist and looked around. The prairie stretched endlessly in all directions, silvered by moonlight, beautiful and terrifying in its vastness. "Why did you come back for me?" she asked quietly. "You did not have to. You could have kept riding with the others." Nathan was silent for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "My mother was left behind once, when I was a boy. We were traveling west with a wagon train, and she wandered away from camp to gather water. The train moved on without her. My father and I did not notice until we were miles down the trail. By the time we got back to her, she had been alone for hours, terrified out of her mind. I will never forget the look on her face when she saw us coming back. I could not do that to another human being, could not just ride away knowing someone had been forgotten." Hannah felt something shift in her chest, a warmth spreading through the cold fear that had gripped her since she realized she was alone. "Your mother was fortunate to have you and your father. She died 2 years later of pneumonia," Nathan said quietly. "But yes, we had good years together before then. What about your family, Miss Ashford? How did you end up washing clothes at Fort Keogh?" Hannah rested her cheek against his shoulder, suddenly too tired to maintain proper distance. "My father was a school teacher in St. Louis. When my mother died giving birth to my stillborn brother, he could not bear to stay in the city anymore. We came west, settled in Miles City for a time. He taught me to read and write, to do sums, to think for myself. Then the cholera came through in '75, and he died along with dozens of others. I had no money, no family, nowhere to go. The Army was hiring laundresses at Fort Keogh, and it was the only work I could find that provided room and board. I have been there ever since." "That is a hard road you have traveled," Nathan said, and there was genuine sympathy in his voice. "How old were you when your father died?" 19, old enough to work, young enough to still feel like a lost child." Nathan adjusted his grip on the reins, and Hannah felt the subtle shift of his body as he turned slightly to look back at her. "You are more than just a washerwoman, Miss Ashford. I can hear it in the way you speak, see it in the way you carry yourself. Your father taught you well." "For all the good it has done me," Hannah said with a bitter laugh. "I can recite Shakespeare and solve equations, but I still spend my days scrubbing other people's dirty clothes." "The world is not always fair to women," Nathan acknowledged. "But we are alive, we are free, and we are riding under a Montana sky that most people will never see. That counts for something." Hannah looked up at the stars wheeling overhead, so many more than she had ever seen in the city, and felt her heart lift despite everything. "Yes," she said softly, "it does count for something." They rode on through the night, and gradually Hannah felt herself relaxing against Nathan's back, lulled by the steady rhythm of the horse's gait, and the warmth of his body shielding her from the cool night air. She must have dozed because she jolted awake when Nathan reined in the horse and spoke in a low, urgent voice. "We have company. Stay very still and very quiet." Hannah's eyes flew open and her heart leaped into her throat. In the moonlight ahead, she could see riders, perhaps a dozen of them, sitting their horses in a line across their path. For a moment, she thought they were the cavalry returned, but then she saw the long hair, the bare chests, the rifles held ready across their saddles, and she knew they were Lakota warriors. Nathan's hand moved slowly to the rifle strapped to his saddle, but he did not draw it. Instead, He raised his right hand in the universal sign of peace and began speaking in a language Hannah did not understand, his voice steady and respectful. One of the warriors, an older man with gray streaking his long hair and an air of authority about him, responded in the same language. The conversation went back and forth for several tense minutes, while Hannah held her breath and prayed silently. She could feel the tension in Nathan's body, the coiled readiness of a man prepared to fight if necessary, but hoping desperately to avoid it. Finally, the older warrior said something that made Nathan relax slightly, and he nodded, speaking again in that fluid language. The warriors parted, opening a path through their line. Nathan urged his horse forward at a walk, and as they passed through, the older warrior spoke directly to Hannah in heavily accented English. "You are fortunate in your companion, woman. He speaks with an honest tongue and treats us with respect. Many white men do not. Safe travels to you both." "Thank you," Hannah managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for letting us pass." The warrior inclined his head slightly, and then they were through, riding on into the darkness while the warriors remained behind like shadows on the prairie. Hannah did not dare speak until they were well away, and when she finally did, her voice shook. "What did you say to them? How did you know their language?" "I lived with the Lakota for 2 years when I first came west," Nathan explained. "I was 16, full of myself, and got separated from my father's trapping expedition. A hunting party found me half dead from thirst and took me to their village. They could have killed me or left me to die, but instead they fed me, taught me their language, showed me how to survive in this country. When I finally found my way back to white settlements, I never forgot what they had given me. I treat them with the same respect I would want for myself, and sometimes that is enough to keep the peace." "What did the old man say to you? The one who spoke to me?" Nathan was quiet for a moment. "He said his people are tired of fighting, tired of being pushed off their land and hunted like animals. He said they were scouting to see if the cavalry was coming to attack their village. And when I told him the soldiers were headed to Miles City to defend the town from a different band, not to make war on his people, he believed me. He let us pass because he said he could see in my eyes that I was telling the truth." Hannah felt tears prick her eyes, though she could not have said exactly why. Perhaps it was the exhaustion, the fear, the strange beauty of the encounter they had just survived. Or perhaps it was the realization that Nathan Barrett was unlike any man she had ever known, and that her life had just changed in ways she could not yet comprehend. They rode on through the remainder of the night, and when dawn broke pink and gold over the eastern horizon, Hannah saw the dust cloud of the cavalry column ahead. Nathan pushed his tired horse into a final canter, and soon they were riding alongside the supply wagons, drawing stares and shouts from the soldiers. Lieutenant Morrison himself rode back to meet them, his face red with embarrassment and anger. "Barrett, where the hell have you been? You disappeared hours ago without a word." "I went back to Fort Keogh to retrieve the person you left behind, Lieutenant," Nathan said, and his voice was cold with barely controlled fury. "Miss Ashford here was forgotten in the evacuation. She spent the better part of the night alone in an abandoned fort in hostile territory, because nobody bothered to do a head count before riding out." The lieutenant's face went from red to pale as he registered Hannah sitting behind Nathan on the horse. "Miss Ashford, we did not realize the evacuation was so hasty." "Save your excuses, Lieutenant," Nathan cut him off. "Just see to it that this woman gets a place in one of the supply wagons and that she is properly accounted for from now on. She has been through enough." Nathan dismounted and helped Hannah down, his hands steady on her waist. She stumbled slightly when her feet hit the ground, her legs stiff and sore from the long night ride. He steadied her, and for a moment their eyes met, and Hannah saw something in his gaze that made her breath catch, a look of concern and protectiveness, and something else she did not yet have a name for. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You saved my life last night. I will not forget that." "You would have done the same for me," Nathan said, though they both knew that was not true. She would not have been able to do what he had done, to ride back alone into danger, to face down Lakota warriors, to navigate the treacherous prairie in the dark. But it was kind of him to say it. A soldier helped Hannah into the back of a supply wagon, and she settled herself among the crates and barrels, her body aching and her mind whirling. As the column began moving again, she watched Nathan mount his horse and ride ahead to join the other scouts at the front of the formation. Even from a distance, she could pick him out by the way he sat his saddle, the easy confidence of a man completely at home in this wild country. The journey to Miles City took another 2 days, and during that time, Hannah found herself watching for Nathan constantly, catching glimpses of him riding the perimeter of the column or conferring with the other scouts. He did not approach her, and she told herself that was proper, that there was no reason for a cavalry scout to pay attention to a washerwoman now that he had delivered her safely to the column. But she found herself disappointed nonetheless, and she lay awake at night in her bedroll, thinking about the feel of his body against hers as they rode, the sound of his voice speaking that foreign language, the way he had stood between her and danger without hesitation. They reached Miles City on the 3rd day, and Hannah felt her heart sink as she saw the rough frontier town sprawled along the Tongue River. It was bigger than she remembered from her brief time living there with her father, rougher and more crowded with the influx of soldiers and miners and cattlemen. The cavalry column rode straight to the newly expanded fort on the edge of town, and Hannah found herself assigned to the same duties she had performed at Fort Keogh, washing and mending for the officers and enlisted men. She tried to settle back into the familiar routine, but everything felt different now. She could not stop thinking about that night ride across the prairie, about Nathan's steady presence and the way he had spoken of his mother, about the brief moment when she had felt like more than just an invisible servant. She watched for him around the fort, but the scouts came and went on their own schedules, often gone for days at a time, and she did not see Nathan Barrett again for nearly 2 weeks. When she finally did see him, it was in the most unexpected of circumstances. Hannah had been sent into town to purchase thread and needles from the dry goods store, and she was walking back toward the fort with her small parcel when she heard raised voices from an alley. She hesitated, knowing she should keep walking, but something about the tone of the voices made her stop and peer around the corner. 3 men had someone backed against the wall, and as her eyes adjusted to the shadows, she realized with a jolt that it was Nathan. He was facing the 3 men calmly, his hands loose at his sides, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "We do not want any trouble," Nathan was saying, his voice even. "I was just passing through." "You are an Indian lover," one of the men spat, and Hannah could smell the whiskey on him from where she stood. "We heard about you, Barrett. Heard you lived with them savages, probably took one of their squaws to your bed. We do not need your kind in Miles City." "What I did or did not do is none of your concern," Nathan replied. "Now, step aside and let me pass." "Or what? You going to fight all 3 of us?" Hannah did not think. She stepped around the corner and called out in her loudest, most authoritative voice, the voice her father had used when addressing unruly students. "Nathan Barrett, there you are. I have been looking everywhere for you. The lieutenant needs you back at the fort immediately." All 4 men turned to stare at her, and Hannah forced herself to walk forward with her head high, as though she had every right to be there. She could see Nathan's eyes widen slightly in surprise, but he recovered quickly. "Miss Ashford," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "I was just heading back." Hannah stopped beside him, close enough that her shoulder brushed his arm, and looked directly at the 3 men. "Gentlemen, I suggest you go sleep off whatever you have been drinking. The cavalry does not take kindly to anyone interfering with their scouts, and I would hate to see you end up in the stockade." It was a complete bluff. She had no authority whatsoever, but she said it with such confidence that the men hesitated. The whiskey had made them bold, but not bold enough to risk tangling with the military. After a tense moment, they backed off, muttering insults under their breath as they stumbled away down the alley. Nathan looked down at her, and for the first time since she had met him, she saw him smile, a real smile that transformed his weathered face and made him look younger, almost boyish. "That was either very brave or very foolish, Miss Ashford, possibly both." "I could not just walk away," Hannah said, and now that the danger had passed, she felt her hands beginning to shake. "Those men were going to hurt you." "They were going to try," Nathan corrected gently, "but I am grateful for your intervention nonetheless. You may well have prevented a fight that would have landed me in serious trouble. The army frowns on their scouts brawling in town, even in self-defense." They walked together back toward the fort, and Hannah found herself acutely aware of his presence beside her, the way their steps fell into rhythm, the occasional brush of his arm against hers. When they reached the fort gates, Nathan stopped and turned to face her. "Miss Ashford, Hannah, I owe you my thanks twice over now. That is becoming a habit." "You owed me nothing," Hannah said. "You saved my life. Helping you avoid a stupid fight is hardly comparable." Nathan studied her face for a long moment, and Hannah felt heat rise in her cheeks under his gaze. "Would you do me the honor of taking supper with me tonight?" he asked abruptly. "There is a decent restaurant in town, nothing fancy, but the food is good and the proprietor is respectable. I know it is forward of me to ask, and you have every right to refuse, but I would very much like to speak with you again. Properly, I mean, not while fleeing across the prairie or intervening in alley fights." Hannah's heart was beating so fast she thought she might faint. A man had never asked her to supper before, had never looked at her the way Nathan was looking at her now, with a mixture of hope and uncertainty that made him seem suddenly vulnerable. "I would like that very much," she heard herself say. 7 o'clock then? I will meet you here at the gates." 7 o'clock, Hannah agreed, and she walked back to the laundry building in a daze, clutching her parcel of thread and needles and wondering what on earth she had just agreed to. She spent the rest of the afternoon in a state of nervous anticipation, scrubbing clothes mechanically while her mind raced. She had only one dress that was not a work dress, a simple blue cotton that had been her Sunday best in St. Louis and was now faded and mended in several places. She washed it hastily in fresh water and hung it to dry, then heated water for a proper bath, a luxury she rarely indulged in. By 7 o'clock, she was as ready as she could be, her hair brushed and pinned up neatly, her blue dress clean, if not fashionable, her mother's silver locket around her neck. She felt like a girl again, nervous and excited and terrified all at once. When she reached the gates, Nathan was already there, and she saw that he had made an effort too. He wore a clean shirt and had shaved, and his dark hair was combed back from his face. "You look beautiful," he said simply, and the sincerity in his voice made Hannah's eyes sting with sudden tears. Nobody had called her beautiful in so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to be seen as anything other than a pair of hands to do the washing. "Thank you," she managed. "You look very fine yourself." They walked together into town, and Nathan led her to a small restaurant tucked between a saloon and a hardware store. The proprietor, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, greeted Nathan by name and showed them to a table near the window. The interior was simple but clean, with checkered cloths on the tables and the smell of roasting meat and fresh bread in the air. Over plates of beef stew and cornbread, they talked. Nathan told her about growing up in Missouri, about following his father west to trap beaver in the mountains, about the 2 years he spent with the Lakota, and what they had taught him about reading the land and moving through the wilderness. Hannah told him about her childhood in St. Louis, about her father's love of learning and how he had encouraged her to think and question and dream, about the terrible loneliness of the years since his death. "Why do you stay with the cavalry?" Hannah asked at one point. "You clearly do not share their views on the Indians. You could make a living as a guide for wagon trains or work as a ranch hand or any number of things." Nathan considered the question carefully before answering. "Because I hope that by being there, by standing between the two sides, I can prevent at least some of the worst of the violence. I know that sounds foolishly idealistic. The Army is going to do what the Army is going to do, and most of the soldiers see the Indians as nothing more than obstacles to be removed. But every now and then, I can translate a conversation that prevents a misunderstanding from turning into a massacre. I can guide a column away from a village instead of toward it. I can speak up when someone proposes something particularly cruel or senseless. It is not much, but it is something." Hannah reached across the table and placed her hand over his, a gesture so bold it surprised her even as she did it. "It is more than most people would do. You are a good man, Nathan Barrett." His hand turned under hers, his fingers lacing with hers, and the simple contact sent a shock of warmth through her entire body. "I want to be good enough for you," he said quietly. "I have been thinking about you constantly since that night we rode together. I know I have no right to feel this way. We barely know each other, but I cannot help it. You are unlike any woman I have ever met, Hannah Ashford. You are brave and intelligent and kind, and you deserve so much more than washing clothes for ungrateful soldiers in a frontier fort." "I have been thinking about you too," Hannah admitted, her voice trembling. "I told myself I was being foolish, that you were just being kind when you came back for me, but I could not stop remembering the way you spoke to those warriors, the way you held me safe on that horse, the way you smiled when I interrupted that fight in the alley. I have felt invisible for so long, Nathan. You make me feel seen." "You are seen," Nathan said fiercely. "I see you, Hannah. I see everything you are and everything you could be. They sat there in the restaurant talking until the proprietor gently informed them that she was closing for the night. Nathan walked Hannah back to the fort, and they lingered outside the gates, neither of them ready to say goodnight. The moon was rising over the prairie, full and bright, and somewhere in the distance a coyote howled. "May I see you again?" Nathan asked. "Tomorrow, or whenever you have free time." "I would like that," Hannah said. "I have Sunday afternoons off, usually." "Then I will take you riding on Sunday if you will trust me. I want to show you this country the way I see it, not as something to be feared, but as something beautiful and wild and free." "I trust you," Hannah said, and she realized as she said it that it was completely true. She trusted this man who had ridden back through the darkness to rescue her, who spoke with respect to people the rest of the world despised, who looked at her like she mattered. Nathan reached up and gently touched her cheek, his calloused fingers feather light against her skin. "Good night, Hannah. I will count the hours until Sunday." "Good night, Nathan," she whispered, and she watched him walk away into the night before she finally turned and made her way back to her small room behind the laundry building. Sunday came after what felt like the longest 3 days of Hannah's life. She could barely concentrate on her work, and the other laundresses teased her about being distracted, though she did not tell them why. When Sunday afternoon finally arrived, she changed into her blue dress again and hurried to meet Nathan at the stables. He had borrowed 2 horses, a gentle mare for her, and his own rangy gelding, and he spent nearly an hour teaching her the basics of riding before they set out. Hannah was a quick study, and soon they were riding side by side across the prairie, heading away from the town and the fort toward the open country beyond. Nathan kept his promise, showing her the beauty of the land. He pointed out the different grasses and wildflowers, the tracks of deer and antelope in the soft earth, the way the cottonwoods clustered along the creek beds. They rode to the top of a bluff that overlooked the Yellowstone River, and Hannah gasped at the vista spread before them, the wide ribbon of water winding through the valley, the distant mountains purple against the horizon, the endless sky arcing overhead. "This is what freedom looks like," Nathan said quietly. "This is why I could never go back east, never shut myself up in a city again. Out here, you can breathe." Hannah understood what he meant. Standing there on that bluff with the wind in her hair and the vast Montana landscape stretching to infinity in all directions, she felt something break open inside her, some cage she had been living in without even knowing it. "I want this," she said suddenly. "I want to feel like this all the time. I am so tired of living small, of being invisible, of accepting that washing clothes in a fort is all I will ever be." Nathan dismounted and came to help her down, his hands strong on her waist. He did not step back when her feet touched the ground, and suddenly they were standing very close, close enough that she could see the lighter flecks of gray in his blue eyes, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the way his pulse beat in his throat. "You could have more," he said, his voice rough. "You could have anything you want, Hannah. You are strong enough, brave enough, you just have to decide to take it." "What if what I want is you?" The words came out before Hannah could stop them, bold and reckless and terrifying. Nathan's eyes darkened and his hands tightened on her waist. "Then I am yours," he said simply. "I have been yours since the moment I turned my horse around and rode back to that fort. I am yours, Hannah, if you will have me." He kissed her then, and Hannah felt the world tilt on its axis. His lips were warm and firm against hers, his arms coming around her to pull her close, and she wrapped her own arms around his neck and kissed him back with all the loneliness and longing she had carried for so many years. It was her first kiss, and it felt like coming home to a place she had never been, like finding something she had not known she was looking for. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Nathan rested his forehead against hers. "I am not a rich man," he said quietly. "I am a scout who lives in a rented room and spends half his time sleeping on the ground under the stars. I cannot offer you a fine house or fancy dresses or any of the things a woman is supposed to want. But I can offer you freedom, Hannah. I can offer you a life where you are my partner, my equal. I can offer you adventure and love and a chance to be more than what the world has told you that you have to be. Will that be enough?" Hannah felt tears streaming down her cheeks, but she was smiling so wide her face hurt. "It is everything," she said. "It is more than enough. Yes, Nathan. Yes to all of it." They stayed on that bluff for hours, talking and kissing, and making plans for a future that had seemed impossible just days ago. Nathan told her about his dream of starting a ranch, a small operation where he could raise horses and live free from the army and the growing tensions between whites and Indians. Hannah told him about her dream of teaching, of opening a school where children could learn regardless of their family's wealth or status. "We could do both," Nathan said thoughtfully. "A ranch needs a main house, and a house could have a schoolroom attached. There are families settling in this area who need a teacher for their children. You have the education, the patience, the knowledge. You could teach Hannah. You could make your father's dream live on through you." The thought took root in Hannah's heart like a seed in good soil. She could see it suddenly, clear as a vision. A small ranch on the prairie with a house that had a schoolroom attached, children learning their letters while horses grazed in the pasture outside. A life built on love and hard work and freedom. It seemed impossible, too wonderful to be real, but Nathan was looking at her like it was the most natural thing in the world. They rode back to Miles City as the sun was setting, and when they reached the fort, Nathan helped Hannah down from her horse and held her hands in his. "I have to leave tomorrow," he said reluctantly. "The cavalry is sending a patrol up toward the Powder River, and they need scouts. I will be gone for at least 2 weeks, possibly longer." Hannah felt her heart clench with fear. "Will it be dangerous?" "Everything out here is dangerous," Nathan said honestly. "But I know this country, and I know how to stay alive in it. I will come back to you, Hannah. I promise you that." "I will wait for you," Hannah said. "However long it takes, I will wait." Nathan kissed her once more, long and deep and full of promise. And then he was gone, leading the horses back to the stable, while Hannah made her way to her room on shaking legs. She lay awake that night, replaying every moment of the day, touching her lips where Nathan had kissed her, holding tight to the hope and joy blooming in her chest. The next 2 weeks were the longest of Hannah's life. She went through the motions of her work, washing and mending and pressing, but her mind was always elsewhere, always worrying about Nathan, always wondering if he was safe. The other laundresses noticed her distraction and commented on it, but Hannah kept her relationship with Nathan private, afraid that speaking of it might somehow make it disappear like a dream in daylight. On the 14th day, the patrol returned. Hannah was hanging washing when she heard the commotion at the gates, and she dropped the shirt she was holding and ran, not caring how it looked, needing to see with her own eyes that Nathan had come back safely. He was there, dusty and tired, but whole, and when he saw her running toward him, his face lit up with a smile that made her heart soar. He dismounted and caught her as she threw herself into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around while the other soldiers hooted and whistled. "I told you I would come back," he murmured into her hair. "I will always come back to you." That night, after Nathan had delivered his report to the officers and seen to his horse, he found Hannah waiting for him at their usual meeting place outside the fort. They walked into town together, and this time, Nathan led her to a small church at the edge of Miles City. The minister was a weathered old man who had been a missionary to the Cheyenne for 20 years before settling in Montana. Nathan shook his hand warmly, and Hannah realized they knew each other. "Reverend Thomas, this is Hannah Ashford. She is the woman I told you about." The Reverend's eyes twinkled. "The washerwoman who faced down 3 drunks in an alley to protect you? I am pleased to meet you, Miss Ashford. Nathan speaks very highly of you." Nathan turned to Hannah, and she saw nervousness in his face for the first time since she had known him. "I know this is sudden," he said. "I know we have only known each other for a few weeks, but I also know that I love you, Hannah Ashford. I love your courage and your intelligence and your kind heart. I love the way you stand up for what is right, even when it is dangerous. I love the way you see the world, the way you dream of something better. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to build that ranch and that school together. I want to wake up every morning with you beside me and fall asleep every night with you in my arms. Will you marry me?" Hannah felt like her heart might burst right out of her chest. "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, Nathan, I will marry you." "Tonight?" Nathan asked. "I know it is not traditional. I know most women want time to plan and prepare, but I cannot bear the thought of spending another night without you as my wife. We could marry tonight, right here, with Reverend Thomas as our witness, and then we could start our life together immediately. Would that be all right?" Hannah thought about what she was leaving behind if she said yes. A job washing clothes, a small, lonely room behind the laundry building, a life of invisibility and endless grinding work. She thought about what she was saying yes to instead. A life with Nathan, a partner who saw her and valued her and loved her, a chance to teach, to build something meaningful, to live free and wild on the Montana prairie. "That would be more than all right," she said. "Let us do it. Let us get married tonight." So they did. Standing in that small wooden church with only Reverend Thomas as witness, Hannah Ashford married Nathan Barrett in the summer of 1878. She wore her faded blue dress and her mother's silver locket. Nathan wore his cleanest shirt and held her hands with a tenderness that made her tremble. They spoke their vows in quiet, steady voices, promising to love and honor each other, to stand together against whatever hardships the frontier might bring, to build a life based on respect and partnership and freedom. When Reverend Thomas pronounced them husband and wife, Nathan kissed Hannah with a gentleness that took her breath away. "Mrs. Barrett," he murmured against her lips, "my wife, my partner, my love." They left the church hand in hand and walked through the dark streets of Miles City to the boarding house where Nathan had been renting a room. It was small and simple, just a bed and a washstand and a window overlooking the street. But to Hannah, it felt like a palace. This was her wedding night, the first night of her new life, and she was not afraid. Nathan was patient and tender with her, taking his time, making sure she felt safe and cherished. They made love slowly in the lamplight, learning the shape and feel of each other, and afterward, Hannah lay in Nathan's arms feeling more content than she had ever felt in her life. This was home, she realized. Not a place, but a person. Home was wherever Nathan was. "We need to tell the army tomorrow that I am resigning," Nathan said quietly, stroking her hair. "I will not be a scout anymore. I will not risk my life for them when I have you to come home to." "What will we do?" Hannah asked. "How will we start this ranch we have been dreaming about?" Nathan was quiet for a moment, thinking. "I have been saving my pay for years. I have nearly $300 put aside. It is not a fortune, but it is enough to buy a small piece of land and a few horses to start. We will have to work hard, Hannah. The first few years will be brutal. We will be building everything from nothing, living in a cabin I will have to build with my own hands, working dawn to dusk just to survive. It will not be easy." "I am not afraid of hard work," Hannah said. "I have been working hard my whole life, but this time I will be working for myself, for us, for our future. That makes all the difference." True to his word, Nathan submitted his resignation to the cavalry the next morning. The officers tried to talk him out of it, offering him more money and better assignments, but Nathan was resolute. He was done being a scout, done putting himself in danger, done serving an institution whose values he increasingly could not support. He had a wife now, and a future to build. Hannah gave notice at the laundry as well, and the head laundress was shocked. "Where will you go?" she demanded. "What will you do? A woman alone has no prospects in this country." "I am not alone," Hannah said, unable to keep the smile off her face. "I am married now. My husband and I are going to start a ranch." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Nathan spent his days searching for land, riding out into the surrounding country to find the perfect spot. He wanted something with good grazing, close to water, but high enough to avoid spring floods, with timber nearby for building and game for hunting. Hannah spent her time purchasing supplies, everything they would need to survive through the winter and beyond. Finally, Nathan found it, 160 acres along a creek that fed into the Tongue River, with rich grass and stands of cottonwood and pine, sheltered by low hills from the worst of the winter winds. The land was available under the Homestead Act, which meant they could claim it for free as long as they lived on it and improved it for 5 years. It was perfect. They loaded everything they owned into a borrowed wagon and set out for their new home on a bright morning in late August. Hannah sat beside Nathan on the wagon seat, watching the prairie roll past, and felt a joy so fierce it brought tears to her eyes. She was 22 years old, and her life was just beginning. The first weeks on the land were the hardest thing Hannah had ever done. They lived in a tent while Nathan felled trees and began constructing a cabin. Hannah helped where she could, but she had never done this kind of work before, and she learned through painful trial and error. Her hands blistered and bled. Her muscles screamed in protest. Every night she fell into their bedrolls so exhausted she could barely move. But every morning she woke up beside Nathan, and he would smile at her and kiss her forehead, and they would begin again. Slowly, day by day, the cabin took shape. 4 walls, a roof, a door, windows made from precious glass that Nathan had purchased in Miles City, a fireplace built from river stone, a wooden floor instead of dirt. It was small and rough, but it was theirs, built with their own hands, and when they finally moved in, Hannah cried with happiness. Nathan brought home 3 mares and a young stallion that he purchased from a rancher downriver, trading most of their remaining cash for the animals. "This is the foundation of our herd," he said, running his hands over the horses with a horseman's practiced eye. "In a few years, with careful breeding, we will have a dozen horses, then 2 dozen. People will come from all over to buy Barrett horses, because they will know our animals are smart and strong and well-trained." Hannah started her school that fall, spreading word through the surrounding homesteads that she was offering lessons for any child whose parents could spare them. She had no books except her father's old Bible and a few primers she had brought from St. Louis, but she made do, teaching reading and writing and arithmetic in the corner of the cabin that she had set aside as a schoolroom. The first day, 3 children showed up. By the end of the month, she had 7 students. The parents paid what they could, some in cash, but more often in food or goods or labor. One father repaired their wagon in exchange for his daughter's lessons. A mother brought them venison and rabbit every week. Slowly, they built relationships with their neighbors, becoming part of the community that was forming in this wild country. That first winter was brutal. The temperature dropped below 0 for weeks at a time, and snow drifted higher than the cabin windows. Nathan spent his days breaking ice in the creek so the horses could drink and hauling firewood to keep them from freezing. Hannah kept the fire going and cooked simple meals from their dwindling supplies, rationing carefully to make everything last until spring. There were nights when Hannah lay awake listening to the wind howl and wondering if they would make it, if they had been foolish to think they could survive out here on their own. But then Nathan would pull her close and she would feel the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart, and she would remember why they were doing this. They were building something that was theirs, a life on their own terms, a future for the children they hoped to have someday. Spring came finally, bringing green grass and wild flowers and baby foals from 2 of the mares. Nathan was ecstatic, spending hours with the newborns, gentle as a mother with his big, work-roughened hands. "Look at them, Hannah," he said, his face alight with pride. "Look at how strong they are, how perfect. This is working. We are actually doing this." That summer, Hannah discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but had not wanted to say anything until she was certain. When she finally told Nathan, he picked her up and spun her around, laughing like a boy, and then set her down carefully, as if she were made of glass. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "You and me, we are going to be parents. Hannah, this is the best news I have ever received." They spent the next months preparing, Nathan adding on to the cabin to create a separate bedroom for themselves, so the baby could have their current sleeping area. Hannah sewed tiny clothes from fabric she purchased on a trip to Miles City, her heart full of hope and anticipation. Her students made gifts for the coming baby, a carved wooden rattle, a soft blanket, a cradle that one of the fathers built with loving care. The baby came in March of 1879, during the last big snowstorm of the winter. The birth was long and difficult, and there were hours when Hannah thought she might not survive it. But Nathan stayed with her the entire time, holding her hand and wiping her forehead and murmuring encouragement. And finally, their son was born. They named him Thomas, after Reverend Thomas, who had married them. And from the moment Hannah held him in her arms, she felt a love so overwhelming it frightened her. This tiny, perfect person was half her and half Nathan. A new life they had created together, and she would do anything, sacrifice anything, to protect him and give him a good life. Nathan was a devoted father from the start. He carried Thomas everywhere in a sling Hannah made, talking to him constantly as he worked with the horses or mended fences or did the 1,000 other tasks that kept the ranch running. "You are going to grow up free," he told the baby. "You are going to learn to ride before you can walk, to read before you start school, to treat everyone with respect, regardless of the color of their skin or where they come from. Your mother and I are going to make sure of that." Hannah's school continued to grow. The schoolroom corner of the cabin was no longer sufficient, so Nathan built a separate building, a proper one-room schoolhouse with benches for the students, and a blackboard he ordered from St. Louis. By the time Thomas was a year old, Hannah was teaching 15 students ranging in age from 5 to 14, and word was spreading that the Barrett place had the best teacher for 100 miles. The ranch prospered too. Nathan's eye for horses proved unerring, and the Barrett horses became known throughout the territory for their quality. Ranchers and cavalry officers alike came to purchase animals, and the small herd grew steadily. They hired a young man named Samuel to help with the work, a former soldier who had nowhere else to go and was grateful for a chance to build something positive after years of violence. When Thomas was 3, Hannah found herself pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and in the summer of 1882, she gave birth to a daughter they named Grace. She had her father's gray-blue eyes and her mother's dark hair, and she was a calm, content baby who rarely cried. Life fell into a rhythm. Nathan and Samuel worked the ranch while Hannah taught school and managed the household. Thomas grew into a sturdy, curious boy who followed his father everywhere and asked endless questions about everything he saw. Grace learned to walk and then to run, and soon she was toddling after her brother, determined to keep up despite being 3 years younger. In the evenings after the children were asleep, Nathan and Hannah would sit on the porch they had added to the cabin and watch the sun set over the prairie. These were Hannah's favorite moments, the quiet times when she could reflect on how far they had come, from that night when Nathan rode back to Fort Keogh to rescue a forgotten washerwoman. "Do you ever regret it?" Nathan asked one evening, reaching over to take her hand. "Do you ever wish we had stayed closer to civilization, had an easier life?" Hannah thought about the question seriously before answering. Their life was not easy. They worked constantly, from sunup to sundown, and there were still hard times when money was tight or the weather turned harsh or illness threatened. But when she weighed that against what they had built together, the freedom and the love and the sense of purpose, there was no comparison. "Not for a single moment," she said firmly. "This is the life I was meant to live. You are the partner I was meant to have. Everything that came before was just preparation for this." Nathan lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it, and the gesture was all the more meaningful for being rare. They were not demonstrative people in public, too busy with work to be constantly touching, but these small moments of affection meant everything. In 1884, the territorial governor visited Miles City and made a point of riding out to the Barrett Ranch. He had heard about Hannah's school and wanted to see it for himself. He spent an entire day observing her teaching, asking her questions about her methods and her curriculum, and at the end of the visit, he shook her hand solemnly. "Mrs. Barrett, you are doing important work here. These children are receiving an education that rivals anything available in the eastern states. I would like to provide you with a grant from the territorial government to expand your school and purchase more books and supplies. Would you accept that assistance?" Hannah looked at Nathan, who was standing in the doorway with Thomas and Grace clinging to his legs, and saw the pride shining in his eyes. She turned back to the governor and smiled. "We would be honored to accept, Governor. Thank you for recognizing the value of the education on the frontier." The grant allowed Hannah to purchase books she had only dreamed of having, histories and geographies and literature. She added higher-level courses for her older students, preparing them for college if they chose to pursue it. Parents from as far as 50 miles away began sending their children to board with neighbors during the school year, just so they could attend Hannah's school. The ranch continued to thrive as well. By 1885, they had a herd of nearly 40 horses, and Nathan had earned a reputation as one of the finest horse trainers in Montana Territory. He was frequently asked to train problem horses for other ranchers, and the extra income allowed them to make improvements to the ranch, adding a proper barn, expanding the house, putting in a well so Hannah did not have to haul water from the creek. In the spring of 1886, Hannah gave birth to their third child, another son they named James. He was a loud, energetic baby from the start, and Thomas and Grace adored him, fighting over who got to help take care of their little brother. The house felt full and alive in a way that made Hannah's heart sing every time she looked around at her family. That summer, a group of Lakota came to the ranch. Nathan saw them approaching from a distance and went out to meet them, unarmed, his hands raised in the sign of peace. Hannah watched anxiously from the porch, baby James in her arms, as Nathan spoke with the riders in their own language. After a long conversation, Nathan turned and waved her forward. Hannah handed James to Grace and walked out to join her husband, her heart pounding. The Lakota were led by an older man, and with a shock, Hannah recognized him as the warrior who had let them pass that night so many years ago. "This is my wife, Hannah," Nathan said in English, then repeated it in Lakota. "Hannah, this is Red Cloud. He and his people are hungry. The government has not delivered the supplies they promised, and they are desperate. I told him we would share what we have." Hannah did not hesitate. "Of course we will. Come, all of you. We have venison and bread, and I can prepare a meal." Red Cloud looked at her for a long moment, and then he said something in Lakota. Nathan translated. He says you have a generous heart and that he remembers you. He says the spirits were wise to bring us together that night long ago, because we have both honored the meeting. They fed the Lakota group and gave them as much food as they could spare, along with blankets and other supplies. When the group left, Red Cloud clasped Nathan's hand and spoke seriously. Nathan nodded, his expression grave. What did he say? Hannah asked after they had gone. He said things are getting worse for his people. The buffalo are nearly gone, and the government keeps breaking its promises. He fears there will be more violence, more bloodshed. He wanted to thank us for treating him and his people with dignity, and to warn me to be careful. He said not all of his young men are as willing to keep the peace as he is. Hannah felt a chill run down her spine. Are we in danger? Nathan considered the question carefully. I do not think so. We have never given them reason to see us as enemies, but the tension in the territory is increasing, and we need to be cautious. I will not let anything happen to you or the children, Hannah. I promise you that. True to Nathan's prediction, the next year saw increased conflict between settlers and the remaining free tribes. But the Barrett Ranch remained untouched, a small island of peace in a region increasingly consumed by violence. Nathan believed it was because of the relationships he had built over the years, the respect he had shown to people the rest of the world tried to destroy. In 1889, Thomas turned 10, and Nathan began teaching him seriously about horses and ranching. The boy was a natural, with his father's instincts and his mother's quick mind. He could gentle a horse faster than most grown men, and he had an uncanny ability to understand what an animal needed. Nathan watched his son with visible pride, and Hannah felt her heart swell seeing them work together. Grace, at 7, was showing signs of becoming a teacher like her mother. She helped with the younger students in Hannah's school, reading to them and helping them with their letters, patient and kind even when they struggled. James, at 3, was a whirlwind of energy who kept everyone on their toes and filled the house with laughter. Montana became a state in November of that year, and Nathan and Hannah rode into Miles City to celebrate and to cast their votes in the first state elections. It felt momentous, being part of this transition from wild territory to established state, and as they stood in line at the polling place, Hannah reflected on all the changes she had witnessed in the 11 years since Nathan had ridden back to Fort Keogh to rescue her. We helped build this, Nathan said quietly, echoing her thoughts. Not just you and me, but everyone who came out here and tried to make something good. This land is soaked in blood and injustice, and I am not fool enough to think statehood will fix that. But maybe it is a step towards something better. Maybe our children will see a time when people can live together in peace, regardless of their origins. Hannah leaned her head against his shoulder. I hope so. God, I hope so. In 1890, Hannah was offered a position as the regional school superintendent, overseeing all the small schools in their part of the state. It was an honor, and it came with a real salary, but it would have required her to travel extensively and give up her own teaching. After much discussion with Nathan, she declined. Her students needed her, and she had no desire to become an administrator when what she loved was the actual work of teaching. The ranch had grown to nearly 200 acres by then, with over 60 horses and a small herd of cattle Nathan had started as a diversification measure. They employed 3 full-time ranch hands now, and during busy seasons they hired additional help. The Barrett Ranch was one of the most successful operations in the region, known for its quality livestock and its fair treatment of workers. In 1892, Hannah gave birth to their 4th and final child, a daughter they named Rose. She came as a surprise, Hannah having thought her childbearing years were behind her at 36, but she was welcomed with joy by the entire family. Thomas was 13 now, Grace 10, and James 6, and they all doted on the new baby. Nathan, at 42, had some silver in his dark hair and lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun, but he was still strong and vital, still the man who had ridden back through the darkness to rescue her. He was an involved, loving father, patient with the children's endless questions and firm when they needed discipline, and Hannah fell in love with him a little more deeply every time she watched him with their children. The years passed in a blur of work and growth and joy. Thomas grew into a young man and took over much of the day-to-day running of the ranch, allowing Nathan to focus on training and breeding. Grace attended normal school in Bozeman and returned home certified as a teacher, taking over more of Hannah's school duties. James showed an aptitude for mechanics and began working at the blacksmith shop in Miles City while still helping on the ranch. Rose grew into a bright, inquisitive child who loved books and horses in equal measure. In 1900, on a warm summer evening, Nathan and Hannah celebrated their 22nd wedding anniversary. Their children threw them a party at the ranch, inviting neighbors and friends from all over the region. There was music and dancing and laughter, and as Hannah waltzed with Nathan under the stars, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the life they had built. 22 years, Nathan said, pulling her close. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I rode back to that fort and found you in the quartermaster's building, terrified and alone. Other times it feels like we have always been together, like I cannot remember a time when you were not the center of my world. I was so scared that night, Hannah admitted. I thought I was going to die alone in that abandoned fort. And then you came back for me, and my entire life changed in an instant. You gave me everything, Nathan. Freedom, purpose, love, family. You gave me myself. You gave me just as much, Nathan said fiercely. You made me want to be better, to do more than just drift through life. You gave me a reason to build something lasting, something good. Our children, this ranch, your school, all of it exists because you saw potential in a rough scout who had spent most of his life running from one place to another. You gave me a home, Hannah. Not a place, but a person to come home to. You. They kissed there on the dance floor, surrounded by their children and grandchildren and friends, and Hannah felt like the luckiest woman in the world. This was not the life she had imagined for herself as a girl in St. Louis, scrubbing clothes at an army fort. It was so much better than anything she could have dreamed. As they grew older, Nathan and Hannah gradually stepped back from the daily work of the ranch and school, letting their children take over. Thomas married a rancher's daughter named Elizabeth, and they built a house on the western edge of the Barrett property. Grace married one of her fellow teachers and continued running the school with Hannah's guidance. James opened his own blacksmithing and mechanics shop in Miles City, becoming one of the most sought-after craftsmen in the region. Rose attended college in the East, the first Barrett to do so, and returned with a degree in literature. Nathan and Hannah spent their later years doing the things they loved most. Nathan trained horses, not for money anymore, but for the pure joy of working with the animals. Hannah tutored students who needed extra help and spent hours reading to her grandchildren. They took long rides across the prairie, just the two of them, revisiting the places that had meant something in their early years together. In 1910, they made a pilgrimage back to Fort Keogh, or what was left of it. The old fort had been partially decommissioned, and much of it stood empty and deteriorating. They walked through the abandoned buildings, and Hannah showed Nathan the laundry yard where she had been when the cavalry rode out without her 32 years earlier. I think about that day often, she said, standing in the overgrown yard. How different my life would have been if you had not noticed I was missing. I would have died there, probably. Or, if I survived, I would have ended up back in some other fort doing the same meaningless work. Instead, I got to live a life beyond my wildest dreams, all because you cared enough to turn around and come back for me. I could not leave you, Nathan said simply. From the moment I realized you had been forgotten, I knew I had to go back. I did not know then that I would fall in love with you, that you would become my wife and the mother of my children and my partner in everything. I just knew it was wrong to leave someone behind, and I had to make it right. Everything else grew from that one decision. They stood there in the ruins of the fort, holding hands, two people who had built a lifetime together from a single act of compassion and a willingness to take a chance on love. Then they mounted their horses and rode home together, across the Montana prairie they both loved so much. Back to the ranch and the family and the life they had created from nothing but determination and devotion. Nathan passed away in 1918 at the age of 68, dying peacefully in his sleep with Hannah beside him in the bed they had shared for 40 years. Hannah grieved deeply, but she did not fall apart. She was 72 years old, surrounded by children and grandchildren who loved her, and she had been blessed with a love story that most people only dreamed of. She lived 8 more years, spending her time teaching her great-grandchildren and working in the garden Nathan had planted for her. And when she died in 1926, she was buried beside Nathan on the bluff overlooking the Yellowstone River where he had first told her he loved her. Their children and grandchildren continued to run the Barrett Ranch for generations, and the school that Hannah started remained open well into the 20th century, educating hundreds of children over the decades. The story of how Nathan rode back to rescue Hannah from the abandoned fort became family legend, told and retold to each new generation as an example of what true love and partnership looked like. The Barrett Ranch still stands today, now run by Nathan and Hannah's great-great-grandchildren, a testament to the life two people built from a single moment of compassion in the wild Montana territory of 1878. The main house still has the schoolroom attached, preserved as a museum, honoring Hannah's work as a teacher. In the barn hang photographs of Nathan with his horses, his skill and dedication remembered by every trainer who works there. And on the bluff overlooking the Yellowstone River, two simple headstones mark the resting place of Nathan Barrett and Hannah Ashford Barrett, a cowboy and a washerwoman who found each other in the wilderness and created something beautiful that outlasted them both. Their story is one of courage and compassion, of second chances and new beginnings. It is the story of a man who turned back when he noticed someone had been forgotten, and a woman who was brave enough to say yes to an uncertain future because it meant choosing love and freedom over safety and loneliness. It is a reminder that sometimes the most important moments in our lives come from the simplest acts of human decency, and that love, when it is real and deep and built on mutual respect, can transform not just two lives, but generations to come. In the end, Nathan and Hannah's love story was not about grand gestures or dramatic rescues, though it began with one. It was about two people who chose each other every single day, who worked side by side to build something meaningful, who raised children with love and taught them to treat others with dignity regardless of differences, who created a legacy of kindness and hard work and integrity that rippled out far beyond their own lifetimes. It was about the quiet heroism of ordinary people doing their best in a hard land, and finding in each other the strength and joy to not just survive, but to thrive. And it all began on a July afternoon in 1878, when a cavalry scout named Nathan Barrett noticed that a young washerwoman named Hannah Ashford had been left behind at Fort Keogh, and made the decision that would change both their lives forever. He rode back through the gathering darkness, found her alone and afraid, and said 5 simple words that became the foundation of everything that followed. "You are coming with us." Those words were a promise, an invitation, and a beginning. They were the first step on a journey that would span nearly 50 years and create a family, a ranch, a school, and a love story that would be remembered long after both of them were gone. They were proof that sometimes the right person comes into your life at exactly the right moment. And if you are brave enough to take their hand and ride with them into the unknown, you might just find everything you never knew you were looking for. Hannah and Nathan's story reminds us that happy endings are not found but built. One decision, one day, one act of love at a time. They are created by people who refuse to leave others behind, who see value in those the world has overlooked, who choose partnership over dominance and compassion over cruelty. They are the reward for courage, for kindness, for the willingness to take a chance on something uncertain because it might lead to something extraordinary. And in the end, that is exactly what Nathan and Hannah found together. Something extraordinary, a love that lasted a lifetime, a family that spanned generations, a legacy that endured long after they were gone, all because a cowboy noticed a forgotten washerwoman and rode back to bring her home. All because that washerwoman was brave enough to wrap her arms around him and hold on tight as they galloped together into their future. All because two people, against all odds, found each other in the wild Montana territory and chose to build something beautiful together. Their headstones on that bluff still stand, weathered by wind and time, but enduring, just like the love they represent. And if you visit the Barrett Ranch today, you can still feel their presence there, in the horses that run in the pasture, and the old schoolhouse that has been lovingly preserved, and the stories that are told around the dinner table about the cowboy and the washerwoman who started it all. Their love story has become part of the land itself, woven into the fabric of Montana history, a testament to the power of compassion and courage and the kind of deep, abiding love that changes everything it touches. Hannah Ashford, Barrett and Nathan Barrett lived full, rich lives together, raised 4 children who all went on to build good lives of their own, created institutions that served their community for generations, and loved each other with a depth and devotion that never wavered from the day they met until the day Nathan died, peacefully in his sleep with Hannah's hand in his. And when Hannah followed him 8 years later, she went peacefully too, content in the knowledge that she had lived the life she was meant to live, loved the man she was meant to love, and left behind a legacy that would endure long after she was gone. Their story is complete, their ending happy, their legacy secure. They were not perfect people. They faced struggles and hardships and loss like everyone does. But they faced it together with love and determination and an unwavering commitment to each other and to the values they held dear. They built something that lasted, something that mattered, something that made the world a little bit better. And that, in the end, is the best happy ending anyone could ask for. The sun sets over the Montana prairie now, just as it did when Nathan first brought Hannah to their land all those years ago, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson and purple. The wind whispers through the tall grass, carrying the scent of sage and wildflowers. The horses graze peacefully in the pasture, descendants of the small herd Nathan started with such hope and pride. The school building stands empty now, but preserved, a monument to Hannah's dedication to education and her belief that every child deserved a chance to learn. And on the bluff overlooking the Yellowstone River, two simple stones mark the place where Nathan and Hannah rest together, side by side as they were in life, their names and dates carved into granite that will endure for centuries more. Below the dates on Hannah's stone, her great-grandchildren added an inscription that captures the essence of her remarkable life. She was forgotten at the fort. He rode back for her. Together, they built a legacy of love. It is a simple epitaph for an extraordinary life, and it tells the whole story in just 16 words. A woman alone and afraid, a man who refused to leave her behind, a choice made in a moment that rippled out across decades, a love that transformed two lives and countless others, a partnership that created something beautiful and lasting from the raw materials of the frontier. This is their story, complete and whole, with every thread woven together and every promise fulfilled. This is how a forgotten washerwoman and a compassionate cowboy found each other in the wilderness and built a love story for the ages. This is how courage and kindness can change everything. This is how a single decision to turn back, to not leave someone behind, can alter the course of multiple lives and create a legacy that endures long after the people who started it are gone. Hannah and Nathan would be proud of what they built together, proud of the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carry on their work, proud of the ranch that still bears their name and the values they instilled. They lived well, loved deeply, and left the world better than they found it. And that is the very best kind of happy ending there is.